And so, that needs to be considered. The free and reduced lunch, that's on the other side, we're talking about 67.3%. The WIC and the food stamps, one of the reasons that that's important, it seems low, and it seems like it would make sense when you talk about the fact that there are jobs and the median income is high, but many of the jobs are really very low level. And one of the reasons that few people really access food stamps and WIC is because we have some policy issues out of Austin and some access issues, even in terms of how you can apply for these benefits. Likewise with CHIP and Medicaid. Uninsured children, now here we start getting into a problem. We're talking 30%, and we do have CHIP, and we do have Medicaid. But even with our CHIP, we don't have year-round enrollment. You have to reapply every 6 months. And if you do any work with low-income people, you know the more times they have to go back and reapply and the more paperwork, well, that's an impediment to their being able to get these benefits. I'm going to skip this other information. A lot of it's on foster care. We've got some big initiatives statewide on disproportionality. Judge Edwards, was just there for our juvenile and violent crime, our JDAI initiative. I have some issues with some of the stuff that they told him, but he and I will talk about that later. But let's go back to the dropout issue. Houston, you have a problem. HISD has over 200,000 students. According to the data from 2006-2007, you had 4,159 students dropped out of HISD. Now that in and of itself looks like, okay, a 5% annual dropout rate. But if you go down and you start talking about the cohort of those students who started the 9th grade, okay, in that year, and you look at the fact that 2,399 of those students dropped out, you're talking about a 22.1% cohort, or almost a quarter of the students. And so that's, and I put that up there because, again, this is something that I co-presented with an individual from HISD, not the U of H person that tried to insult me, but you have to take it and drill it down to another level, because if you look at it just as the dropout rate, it's one thing. If you look at it in terms of who starts the 9th grade and who doesn't successfully matriculate, that's something that's completely different. So anyway, what we did, because the topic of this panel is what lawyers can do, we basically convened a group of concerned individuals. There were lawyers, some judges, and we dealt a lot with the JP judges, Justice of the Peace. We have a lot of them. They don't have to be lawyers in Texas. But one of the things that's important is that they do the truancy cases. And truancy, which is basically absenteeism, lateness for school, those are early indicators of a child being susceptible to dropping out. And we see truancy really starting again with the 3rd grade. I know some of you are familiar with that whole 3rd grade testing, predicting, the outcomes for a child at 3rd grade. If a child is truant, that means 10 or more unexcused absences in a school year, then they have been found to be almost 60% more likelihood to drop out by the time they get to the 9th grade. So looking at, those truancy numbers and looking at the fact that the JPs actually have jurisdiction, it was important that we drew them in. And of course we also had juvenile judges, because if a child has dropped out, they're at a higher probability of committing offenses and getting into the juvenile justice system. So in 2006, 2007, this was the map of our dropouts around HISD. And you see that line that goes around this big jurisdiction. And so we had this concentration of dropouts. And the goal that we set, really it was funny, because we also had a bunch, some educators, and we had a lot of demographers, and so they wanted to make sure we charted everything. And they said, well, what do we want to do? How can we reduce this? And we said, well, we want to reduce it, and we kind of knew how. We were really afraid to set a benchmark, but we said if we can at least get it reduced by, anywhere from 3 to 5%, we'd be happy over the next 2 years. Here in 2009, 2010, we see that there is, and it's not a side by side, but there's some reduction, and we really felt like we were successful, because you see far less dots. All those dots represent, dropouts and dropout areas. So we were able to reduce it. Again, it's not perfect. We think we've made some advances over the last year and a half, but what has it taken to get to that? collaboration, communication, community, strategy, policy review, targeted funding, and data. And those are things I think we heard this morning. I think we're all talking about the same thing. They were going at it this morning really in a more intricate manner than I am, obviously, this afternoon, but it took all of those factors to pull us together. The collaboration, we were lucky when I was still the executive director of the Commission on Children to have America's Promise Alliance reach out to us. And they did reach out to us. That's Colin Powell's group. It's about 11 years old, where he pulled all the living presidents together in Philadelphia about 11 years ago and talked about making children a priority. And their key initiative is Grad Nation, which is basically to achieve a 90% graduation rate nationwide by 2010. The way we got involved with America's Promise in the Houston-Harris County area was after Katrina. Most of you know that there was a large influx of displaced children and families into the Houston area from New Orleans. And when they came, our then mayor and our then county judge embraced them and set about coming up with a community plan to make sure that we could support them. Now we're talking 100,000 plus people, so that's tremendous. I mean, that's, again, it was a flood of biblical proportions, and you saw a movement of people of biblical proportions. And so how do you bring them in? Again, my focus is on the children. And one of the issues that we had is that schools in New Orleans were academically underachieving, to say the least. Many of the children, particularly those in the Ninth Ward, were quite poor. Thirdly, there were a lot of cultural issues because New Orleans, Louisiana itself is quite different from other parts of the United States. And fourth, but probably most important, they had been traumatized. And so we were dealing with a tremendous amount of trauma. We had a session at the University of Houston Law Center about 2 years after the storm that was interdisciplinary, really dealing with all of these issues. Plus, let me add this, there was no paper on any of them, okay? Because everything had been washed away. So, you could bring your 14-year-old and swear that they were in the 10th grade, and realistically they had been in the 6th grade in Louisiana. So we had all kinds of issues. And so America's Promise had called me and said, if we hypothetically have a couple $1 million to give you, what would you do with it to aid these children? And what we did was, develop some programming that would, one, address the trauma, two, address the academic insufficiencies, and three, also do some job training support for they and their families so that we could get them engaged. So we had that money, we had local youth agencies, the same ones you all have in your communities, the Department of Strategic Partnerships that was within HISD, the faith-based, that was very important also. Ministers Against Crime is a biggie in our community. And there's the ministers have a big homework credit recovery lab that they had gotten some dollars for and that we were experimenting with. We could expand that. The law enforcement in courts, community colleges, which is a big piece of this puzzle. And then we had events. We reach out to dropouts. Every year the mayor goes out with teams of their friends, and we talked to people that have dropped out about coming back to school. We use the media for communication. We had targeted automated call-out systems. And I want to cite an example of something that was not, well, it was a targeted call-out system, but it wasn't automated. We have one principal who's been at his school for over 40 years. It's an elementary school. And he has these astronomical success rates with his kids. And he's old school, African American, in one of the poorest zip codes in Houston. He's not a charter school. He is not the epitome of innovation, but he does something every single morning. When school starts, he has the attendance clerk bring him the attendance. And he looks at it and he sees who's not in school. And he makes a personal call to every household that the child is at home. And he asks why the child is home. If he is not satisfied with the answer, he gets into his gas-guzzling Cadillac, drives to the house, and insists that he see this child. And then if the mother says the child is sick, and he says, well, I have a nurse, and he goes totally against convention, and he puts that child in his car and takes them back to school. okay? Because he believes that much in learning. And so again, that piece of innovation, not always saying that, you know, the newest thing is the best thing, is something that we can embrace. Back to why you're a lawyer, we've had to on occasion advise him of when he is within his rights and when he's not. The community, again, the YMCA, local partnerships, Fifth Ward Enrichment Program, which is a male outreach program that we have, and again, one of our worst zip codes in our city, and they really only deal with males, both African American and Latino, and they have a lot of males. In fact, they have almost all males that work there, and they've been highly effective. Service learning, because a lot of kids can't, return to school. They've got to work. We have to face that. Strategy, the National Dropout Prevention Center, Apollo 20. I'm not going to talk a lot about that. You can Google Houston Independent School District, and that's kind of the big initiative that they have going. Focus on other interventions, response interventions. Again, looking at that data, if you see where a child is consistently absent from school, you intervene then, you don't wait until they drop out. And then here, now this is probably one of the best pages for us, the policy review. There's the state level stuff, and some of you are with educational agencies, compulsory attendance, required attendance interventions, adult enrollment. We have, as I said earlier, we have a lot of young children, but we also have, and then this is very touchy because this touches on child welfare as well as juvenile justice. I've made a lot of efforts to point out to people that a lot of our 3-year-olds have 19-year-old parents that dropped out. And so when you're trying to do this early childhood intervention, then why we need to intervene with that 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old mom and dad that haven't completed their education too. And so that creates that whole wraparound model that I think is very important. At the city and county level, and this was also touched on in the earlier presentations, curfews, public housing, Josephine, we've got to do public housing, affordable housing. We've got to talk about, where these families live and how they can get to school, juvenile probation, promotion standards on the district level, graduation requirements, and expulsions and removal. We've had kind of sort of a turnaround with zero tolerance, not so much statewide, but at least within Houston and Harris County. A lot of the powers that be have come to realize that zero tolerance, while maybe well-intended, just really is not working to promote the best outcomes for children. So we kind of have had some formal as well as informal movement on that. And the targeted funding, grants, collaborative reduction grants that are on the state level, partnering with local agencies. I won't spend a lot of time on that. You all can do that in your individual communities. And then the data, as I talked about, the early warning signs, assessment data, attendance data, all that's important. And I think something that, you say, what can you do as a lawyer? If you like working on the community level, and I mean the grassroots community level or the mid-roots community level, this data often needs to be interpreted to those parents. We talk about parent engagement. You throw this at them and they don't know what you're talking about. So you can, your legal expertise and your ability to persuade, be in a position to interpret this in a manner that they understand it. It's not hard to say your child's not going to school and that puts them at risk of dropping out. Now, if you throw them a lot of numbers, that's meaningless to them. Plus, it's not personalized. Okay, let me just give you, because my boss who did save myself and my staff, I want to talk just for like 2 minutes about some of the stuff that he did. Commissioner L. Franco Lee is my current boss. As I said, he is the county commissioner for Precinct 1. He began in 1987, because of this data that I just showed you, some community programs that work not inside of the schools per se, although often at schools, but to offer enhancement. And what, I didn't bring the data because I know I wouldn't have time to go over it, but over the course of these past 25 years, he's had over 30,000 students that have gone through multiple components of his program. And the reality is of those 30,000 students, about 96% of them have graduated successfully from high school and gone on, in many instances, if not to a full 4-year college, they've gone on to participate meaningfully in our society and have jobs. He has 4 components: the summer games, the Northeast Adolescent Program, Discovery Camp, and the Aquatics Program. And he collaborates between public and private agencies.